Welcome to What Your Pastor Really Thinks, the unique podcast with pastors telling you what they really think beyond the pulpit. Pastor Drew Tarwater, how you doing?
I'm great. Good to be with you guys.
Pastor Matt Wolf. Is a pastor of Dr. Matt Wolf? I can't keep up with all the accolades in front of that one.
Yep, it's good to be back.
And then we got Pastor Ryan McBride from Catalyst Church. How you doing, sir?
Doing great, guys. Good to be back on, do another couple episodes. This is going to be awesome.
We're talking about world leaders, political leaders, getting along with leaders. How do you respect leaders? How do you get along with people that just like leaders you don't like? Drew, you've been hearing a lot about this, through this election cycle. What are your initial thoughts when someone says, hey, you should respect the leaders even when you disagree with them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that there is such a polarizing element to politics, and coming out of this crazy political season we had in 2016, 2020, now 2024, here we are 2025, and the inauguration is upon us, and we've got new leaders, and it's really easy to just give opinions off the cuff. But I think God calls us to more as Christians and as leaders. You have this really interesting context when you look at what Scripture has to say, because the Apostle Paul is writing to a group of Christians who lived under the rule of the Roman emperor, who was a horrible guy and he did the most atrocious things. And for Paul to say that we should honor our government leaders, he's saying something pretty big there comparative to what we see in our culture today here in America.
Oh, it's an interesting thought there, especially with the disagreement. Matt, you see a lot of probably disagreement. Your church is there in the Denver area. There's probably a lot of red and blue mixed in there together, probably a little purple somewhere. Yeah. And so how do you deal with that when you probably have people I don't know if you have pews in churches anymore, but people in the same pews, but with different political views to sort of go, hey, we're still going to live in community together.
Yeah, no, it's a big deal here in Denver. I haven't seen the 2024 breakdown yet, but in 2020, Denver voted more for Joe Biden than even Portland, Oregon did. We're one of the bluest cities in the country. And on top of that, Colorado was one of the only states that went bluer in this last election in 2024. So we're there. And then there's also Christians tend towards a lot more conservative, especially evangelical Christians. So how do we coexist in the church is a big deal. It can cause conflict in our community groups. We've seen it. And this goes both ways. I can't just point at this conservative provocateur over here or this person, there's conflict all over the place. And this is a big deal. I love that Drew drew the attention to honor, because that is a big deal. With Paul, it was Nero. And if you're going to honor that guy, he loved to turn his political enemies, including Christians, into candlesticks. That's what he did. And yet it says to honor somebody like that. And what? Well, honor goes pretty big. And when Christians, and I've seen this both times, in 2020, I've seen it in 2016, I'm probably going to see it again heading into this inauguration, is well, that's not my president. I don't like that guy's policy. So, I'm not going to respect him. I'm going to call him, the big angry orange Hitler, or I'm going to call him, let's go Brandon. Let's not get into that. And, whatever it is, it's is that honorable? Is that honoring someone? Is that respecting someone? I think this is a big deal for Christians, and we need to change how we talk and send memes because they get way past that line of showing honor.
Despite how funny the memes are on both sides. Yes. Pastor Ryan, you're in the mountain town, which we would traditionally think is more red, but that's not always true, or at least with the concerns people have even in those areas, especially with respecting political leaders. What would you tell someone like the difference between honoring the person versus maybe even honoring the office, that the title?
Yeah. It's a great question. I'll first address, our context is a little bit different. If you look at a traditional voting map, even from 4 years ago to this year, for the state of Colorado, you see, Denver area, the I-70 corridor, all up and down I-25 is blue. It's a little bit more purple, red around Colorado Springs, but here in Fremont County, where I'm at, we're bright red. I think, and I was looking at this. our percentages we were like 67.98% red this year. So a little bit more shift even than like 4 years ago, which is interesting. So what we're seeing even here in a more rural context is a little bit of a swing, a little bit of a shift. And I know that just having talked with people post-election this last November in my church, we have a lot more people now who are from the different side of the political aisle. We have people who've expressed concern and even fear to me. And so even in a place that's traditionally bright red and very conservative, we're fielding some of those issues with our people and having to talk with people about those things. And so it's not always, just cut and dry like that for us here. But that being said, we are still pretty red here in good old Fremont County, Colorado. So I think I think there is a time and a season for recognizing and calling out if there is an issue that is a real sin issue. I don't think that there's anything wrong with addressing that and talking about that and being very open and honest about how do we approach that, how do we respond to that as Christians. But if the conversation is about how do we extend honor not only to the office and the powers that be, but also to our friends, to our peers, to the people sitting down the aisle. I think honor is the real direction of the conversation. How do we love people well, even though we may completely disagree with their political leanings? So
no, absolutely. Drew, I got a question for you, kind of leaning on that, kind of going the opposite way of honor. But like you hear a lot of you hear this term in Christianity a lot, at least I do. It's like, you don't judge me. You can't judge me. You don't know my story. But then they're going to judge their political leader just as harshly as they're asking not to be judged. So how do you kind of balance that with people? Like you want people to understand your full story, but you're reading a headline about somebody else and going, I'm making my judgment call based on that. How do you help balance that tension? Because we also don't expect to have personal relationships with all our leaders either.
Yeah, I think that's why the gospel is the great equalizer. Jesus said, hey, I forgave you, so you should go and forgive others. And so I think as we think about that, I talk to my kids about that all the time. They get mad at each other and I say, hey, remember, Jesus forgave us of so much. We should forgive each other of these little things. And I think the same is true in that area too, Rob, when we think about, well, hey, I've been through so much. Don't judge me. You should give me extra grace. And then we immediately turn around and go, hey, but this politician, he may write him off. And so I think the gospel helps us become, put on clean lenses to see the world. Hey, I'm a mess. They're a mess too. And I think also if we can look at that in light of what scripture has to say, we can realize that we're not electing government leaders like we would a pastor or someone who's going to be over a religious institution. I think we over time we began to elect leaders based on their righteousness and their holiness rather than being good leaders. And I'm reminded of 1 Peter 2. Notice what Paul says. He says, 1 Peter 2:13, he says, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. And then notice verse 17. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. So our love and respect and honor is for God first, but then because of that, we honor those who are put ahead of us as government leaders, whether we agree with them or not, and not because we think that they're holy, righteous people, but because we recognize that God has a purpose for government and he has a purpose for the way we should speak about them.
No, it's an interesting way to think about it, like almost like there's a little hierarchy that gets explained there of how we should treat, people in authority and how we keep God on top of it as well. So Matt, when you see people in your church talking and in the political season, there's a lot of rhetoric and sloganisms. Like I understand there's politics. People use catchy slogans. They're not always 100% true, but they're just catchy. And it's politics. My wife and I have talked a lot about where, like, what happens in politics is a lot like sports. What happens in the game of politics, you couldn't get away with in a public setting generally. Just like if Drew and I are playing a game of football and we're playing tackle football, I can't just go tackle Ryan on the sidewalk and he'd be like, "What are you doing? We're not playing the same game." So, like, how do you help people kind of, break apart when it's like, hey, we're not playing politics anymore. We're living in community.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I've been thinking about it a lot on two different levels, because we've talked about like the politician itself, but the person who we disagree with politically, and both of those are people. And I think we have to keep them as individuals. We have to think of them as humans. And if Jesus teaches us to love our neighbor as ourselves and to love our enemies, like, ooh, okay, even if I completely disagree with them, they're my political enemy, I've got to love them. And I think that's important because both sides, the rhetoric has gotten out of hand. Let me give you a couple examples that if you're a Republican, a lot of Republicans will say, hey, if you vote for Democrat, especially Christians, they'll say, that means you hate babies. You're a baby murderer. Okay. Now, I know a lot of Democrats who love children, who love babies, who actually want abortion to go away. They don't think it's a good thing. I might disagree with their political decision to allow it in certain cases, but that's saying, like, to say that person is a baby murderer. Is that loving? And then on the other side, if they're like, okay, if you vote Republican, that means you hate immigrants, you hate women, you hate LGBTQ. Like, no, to disagree on political things doesn't mean hate. And so when we play into that, just even saying I voted for this person, I didn't, they're like, oh, you're a hater. Either side, it's like, no. We've got to love. And that's really important. So we've got to remember the Democrat, the Republican is an individual who we care about, love, that we shouldn't, just cancel them on social media or cancel them in real life because they disagree with us. We might disagree on politics, but that doesn't mean they're that evil necessarily. So we've got to love the person. And then the second level is on the politicians. And this one's I've really been thinking about a lot lately, because on the local level, we have a mayor here in Denver who a lot of people are not happy with right now. Some of the issues with homelessness, we have homeless people all over the place camping in our neighborhood. They bought a huge hotel right next to our neighborhood. The mayor did, that was his big push, Mike Johnson. And now the mayor's like at war with the borders are about illegal immigrants and undocumented citizens. I'm not trying to push any buttons on that, but that mayor actually lives in our neighborhood that our church is at. His kids go to the school across the street from our church. One of his kids has even come to our youth group. And I see this person as like, maybe I disagree with him politically, but I don't know, does he know Jesus? And I want him to. And I hope, we actually hope I can meet Mike at some point. And I want to show him respect and honor, not just as a human being, because he is one. I mean, he's literally like one of my neighbors, but also like he could be going to heaven or hell. And I hope and pray that he will be going to heaven. And I want to make sure that happens. And if I humanize a person like that, it really makes me stop and say, should I say that funny political joke? Should I say that thing? Or maybe I should shut my yapper.
Yeah, no. And so, Ryan, when you're dealing with more of a red area, but there's a obviously some lines of blue going through there and people concerned with what's going on. Like, how do you help get, with that tension and that balance in a community where, maybe there's, over exaggeration of what people believe, but there's an honest fear that's created. Like, how do you help them out and work through stuff to sort of like, so you can live in community, which is what we're commanded to do.
Yeah. It's interesting. Leading up to the elections, we did a series in Daniel called Against the Grain, challenging our people to, what does it mean? What does it look like to live against the grain of culture, like Daniel did when he was living, in the margins of society, there in Babylon. And, the particular challenge that we have being so red, so conservative is, we find, and not so much in our church, probably maybe a little bit, but just in general, we see a real unloving spirit among the conservative people here towards the minority in the blue. And it's really interesting. I don't know if you guys have ever heard Mark Driscoll talk about this, but he talked about like different positions that a Christian can take. And he was talking about, the Essenes were kind of let's just get everything out of culture. Let's go build a bunker and, get the kids out, type of thing. And then, of course, your Zealots, they just wanted to go pick a fight whenever they could. But then he started talking about the Pharisee. The Sadducees were like the left of the day. And, they didn't believe in everything in the Torah, and they omitted a lot. But he was talking about the Pharisees, and it was really interesting that the word Pharisee means separated. And so what you typically saw with the Pharisees, which would be like the modern day right, the conservatives, is their main goals were separation from unbelievers and division with believers. And I just thought, oh my gosh, not much has changed in the last couple thousand years. You see a lot of a spirit of division among believers, and unholy talk and unholy fingers posting ridiculous quips on social media, and it's just so unloving. And if we're called to to love others as Christ has loved us, that should change the way that we think about this. And so that's a unique challenge that I've had to navigate in teaching through this season, and we continue to try to find creative ways to do that. So
one of the things I look forward to for my political views is what my friends and people are saying on social media. It's 100% how I get my information. So when you guys post stuff about your political views online, you are changing my opinion, just in case you were wondering. So one of the thoughts, like I've heard this a lot, and you'll probably hear me say this a lot over time, is the idea of understanding the other side. You really don't know what the other side says, whether it's a worldview, a political view, until you go, I can see why that sounds appealing. When people want to go, I don't see how you could like the right. I don't see how you could like the left. If you don't see what's appealing about either worldview, you probably don't understand it. And so, Drew, when you're dealing with people, because you're in Denver, you have people on both sides. How do you help bridge the gap? Because you're not trying to be a political mediator, but a Jesus mediator. How do you bring people back to Jesus?
Yeah, I think it begins with talking about identity. One of the realities is when we let something really get us upset, we've got our identity tied to that in some way. And so people who identify with, like, say, a label, like a political party, or, an area, some people joke about, hey, I'm super liberal, or man, I'm ultra conservative. When we begin to use those kind of labels ahead of our faith, we totally get ourselves out of order. And then it becomes really easy to speak things that aren't honorable and that don't honor God. And so I think you have to start with identity. There's this reality, like when God says something is good for us, but then we respond with, yeah, but that's showing there's something going on inside of us that we need to correct. So I think if we can start from the place of saying, hey, look, I'm a Christian. I'm not a Republican I'm not a Democrat. I'm a Christian first, and I vote this way. It allows us to pull ourselves out of the fray and actually be able to understand the other side and engage in real conversation with people. And I think that's what people want, right? Like, people want to be heard. They want to be respected. And so when we can open up and have real dialogue with people, I think it helps, as Matt said earlier, it helps humanize people to see that, man, we're all on this journey together, and we're trying to honor God. But to do so, we have to take a deep, hard look at who does God say that we are? And he says that we are his sons and his daughters. And that is what comes first.
Matt, when you're thinking of people, because once again, being the Denver, I think I keep saying, like, everyone's got it different. Everyone's got a lot of both sides in their church, which I think is awesome. I think one of the biggest things we lose sometimes is if you're a hard conservative, you don't see the need for the liberal. If you're a liberal, sometimes you don't see the need for the conservative. But really, when you look at how life works well, is work well together. It's like you need both ideas to help build community and society. If you had all conservatives, we'd probably be working 6.5 days a week. If you had all liberals, we'd be working. Would we get anything done? Who knows? We'd all just be playing music. Who knows? So, Matt, when you're thinking about that tension in the community, like, how do you, like what Drew was saying, like, how do you help people identify with Jesus more than their political view or ideologue.
Yeah, I think you're right on, Rob. And there is some practical help with it. I know, some very liberal people in my congregation who remind me sometimes to be a little more compassionate, a little more merciful to the homeless, to those who are in oppressed or historically oppressed minorities, like that reminds you of that. And then there's, conservatives, Republicans who help remind me about the necessity of diligence and hard work and fairness and justice. And there is a help with both of that. And I think that's important to remember, because that's what we want. We want to have all of those because all of those represent Christ. And I would say, I want to get on a real practical level if we're going to do that. If we're actually going to do identity, it's not just like, let me just think differently. I think we have to take some practical steps to change our identity. And the first one I would suggest would be to change your media consumption. I think it's like a non-essential, because somebody is discipling you, which is like training you. Somebody's training you, someone's educating you, and hopefully it's to be like Jesus. But there's a lot of people who are not trying to get you to be like Jesus. They're trying to get you to be like, this right-wing person like Trump or like Kamala Harris, and what you're hearing. I remember talking with one guy, and he was dealing with a lot of fear and anxiety about the future of the country. And then through the conversation, it came out that every night he was falling asleep at night, and he wouldn't fall asleep. He was listening to Glenn Beck for 3 hours every night. Like, he's lying in bed next to his wife, listening to Glenn Beck with an earpiece in. And I'm like, no wonder why you have anxiety. Like 3 hours of that every night. And some people are doing that, whether it's Fox News or MSNBC, if that still exists, or CNN or whatever it is, like 3 hours of that, or reading the news, or you're in your news app, or even if it's just on social media and you're clicking on every news source and everything, that is going to get your brain to think anxiety, fear, anger. And the more and more you do that, you stop viewing people like people. And I have found that in my own heart. The more politics I looked at back in November, like I was starting to think less of people that I disagreed with politically. And I'm like, that's a bad place to be. I need to cut off that consumption and replace it with something better, So stop the 3 hour binging at night, maybe listening to the Bible for 3 hours. You might sleep better. And guess what? I always tell people, like, if you fall asleep reading your Bible at night, I think God's good with that. If you fall asleep praying, like, that's a great thing. Don't be like, oh, I messed up in my prayer life. No, I think God's happy. Just keep praying, keep reading your Bible, and be discipled to be like Jesus, not like a political figure.
Ryan, when you're thinking of the practical things to help people like deal with the anxiety, deal with the fear, uncertainty. I think a lot of it is like people just don't like uncertainty, like especially in an election cycle in businesses. People, businesses don't like uncertainty of what's coming up and with policies and procedures. When you deal with people that are just dealing with uncertainty with political leaders and what policies are going to change, how do you help them point it back to Jesus?
Yeah, something that I try to say frequently, and I read it in a book one time, and I couldn't even know who to attribute this quote to, but we encourage our people all the time, like, hey, like, your goal shouldn't be to make a point. There's a lot of people during this season just making a point, wanting to have a loud voice, and you should want to make a difference. And so we talk about everybody knows what Christians are against. Not everybody knows what we're for. So have your mind towards those things. Have your mind towards, to be clear, we are for the broad kingdom of God, which includes people from all sides of the political aisle. I know people who love Jesus, follow Jesus, serve in the church, from both sides of the coin. And so we just try to encourage people that way. And I think, Matt, you're right on with what are you being informed by? If you are spending time feasting on God's word, spending time with the Lord, that's going to inform your relational capacity and how you're going to deal with others when disagreements arise. So that we just try to continue to encourage people that way. Just, hey, how are you actively trying to make a difference?
No, that's great. And Drew, we're getting ready to wrap this up. And I want to go back to something Matt said, I think it was earlier. And it was just the idea of, like, we use the term righteousness with, our political views, but people, I use the term steal righteousness, so they want to feel righteous in their decision. Cause if I'm voting Republican, I'm not a baby killer. if I'm voting Democrat, it's like, I love the immigrant. It's like all these other things. It's like where there's a tension in there. It's like people want to steal righteousness and claim righteousness on their side. How do you sort of help kind of like break that down in the sense of like, if you're claiming righteousness in this issue, it's like what you're trying to steal it is what I've seen. And so they feel good about the decision they're making. How do you help break people? Like, it's like, are you seeing it on both sides? How do you address that with your people?
Yeah. One of the ways we try to communicate that is by saying that when we put our hope in the leader, we put our hope in a political party, we put our hope in, say, a strategy or a set of policies, we're always going to be let down. What we have to realize is that our hope is in the gospel. Our hope is in Jesus. And so ultimately, we want to help make decisions based on the best option, right? We want to try to elect the best leaders. But ultimately, that leader doesn't hold the world in his hands like Jesus does. Mm-hmm. And so we have to just trust that God is in control and that he is more powerful than any political leader or political party or a political season that we're in. And a choice that a leader makes that we might disagree with in politics here in our country, we have to know that God's will ultimately be done as we put our trust in him and he shapes us. And so I think it gets back to the point of saying, where's your hope found? If your hope is found in this political leader, in 4 years, there's going to be another one and everything's going to be reversed and changed. So put your hope in Jesus because he's the one that leads to lasting change.
Matt, as we wrap this up, parting thoughts, respecting your government leaders, respecting your people across the aisle, but yet sitting in your pews.
Yeah,
you guys still use pews, by the way. I mean, I just keep using pews because I'm old. Is that fine? Like in your padded,
it's metaphorical pews
and your padded soldered chairs.
Yeah, metaphorical pews. In the metaphorical pews, I would just say, yeah, let's respect one another. If your goal was to respect and to love and to honor those, like just keep those verbs at the top of your mind, and I think it's going to change your behavior and your words a bit.
Yeah. Ryan, as we wrap this up, parting thoughts.
Yep. Just continue to love one another well. And if you're listening to this and you're a Christian, you're a Christ follower, I'll just encourage you to really take some time, maybe take an honest inventory of ultimately what your goal is, which is to be the light of the world, which is to shine a spotlight on Jesus. And that comes out in our speech, in our actions, how we talk about these things. And we're not trying to make it seem like these are not big. These are big, hot button world issues right now. And so just trying to bring perspective of how do we continue to extend the light and the beauty and the hope and the joy of the gospel in how we even just interact with people who disagree with us. So just take some time, consider that this week, but know that we love you all. No matter what side that Jesus is for you, we are for you, and it's why we do what we do.
I love you even if you're wrong.
Pastor Drew, Pastor Matt just said he loves you even when you're wrong.
I say, man, live the golden rule, right? Treat others like you want to be treated, and if you were a leader, how would you want people to speak about you? And so, it gets back to honoring God for sure.
Yeah, no, as we wrap this up, guys, thank you so much. I appreciate your thoughts. You guys have made me think about things in different ways today. I hope if you're listening, you've thought things a different way. Remember, always take it back to Jesus, and we're excited for what you guys are thinking. If you have thoughts, questions, send them to us, put them in the comments. We'll look at them. We're looking forward to hear from you. Questions you guys want us to dig deeper into something, let us know here at What Your Pastor Really Thinks. Coming up here in the next few weeks, you're going to hear topics. Subscribe too. And also, we're going to be talking about some other fun topics about aliens, Christian hedonism, other fun things. So stay tuned because I'm looking forward to the alien talk. I'm getting my aluminum foil hat ready. So looking forward to it, guys. I'm going to listen to some Art Bell here before we get prepped for it.
We'll see you guys next time.